especially it means that less perspiration will go on to here, because this is more thin than the brim, the actual brim. So if the perspiration, especially on a lighter colored hat, if perspiration then appears here, eventually it goes through the band. It is better if it goes here, but also it will not likely go here as quickly or as much, because less perspiration will go here, so they actually saw them beneath. But even if you did that, eventually there will be a lot of perspiration there. The perspiration, and especially with people who have a lot of salt, like me, in their perspiration, the salt will ingrain itself into the cloth. And even with the naphtha, I used the naphtha, which was very in the zipper fuel, to clean this hat. It barely worked, and I used a lot. I mean, anymore that was just beginning to kill the felt. So it barely works. It's extremely hard to wash. It's really hard to wash wool. That is, what's it called? Woolen. That is like my cloth, like my frock coat, like that is loomed. So felt, kind of impossible to wash. And the problem with, you may tell me, yes, but the true, genuine, very heavy, very dense and brushed entirely by hand, even the best of the best thing, those like until 1810 that were worn by this. So the wool process from the start was of the best quality, because they wore those pelts and it degraded naturally through time, through a year, through about 8 months to 12 months with the rider's perspiration. Now it was not put through chemicals to separate the guard hairs from the undergrowth hairs of the beaver pelt. So even starting with the beaver that it was killed was the strongest, best beaver ever. Even like that, so not because that was beaver, not the beaver, I mean the white hair, the best white hair, whatever. And they make the very dense, they start with a very dense, thick piece of felted white hair, wool, and then they brush it here. I mean, it takes, I think, at the very least 40 minutes to do it really properly by hand for one side, right? And that is 40, and that is 40 minutes for one side, and that was back in the 1920s when they were not really making hi-hats. So hi-hats probably more, probably 50 minutes, perhaps an hour. One side, on the fence. If they did the other side, another hour, just brushing, dipping it after 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, dipping it into that super hot shellac liquid, whatever, taking it out, rebrushing it and all. And you had to do it in 1 year, so it will not come back, so they use these really strong fellows that only did that, and they were paid a lot for that, because they used up, they had a lot of shoulder issues from the brushing, and also they often felt like vomiting from spying all those fumes whilst doing a tremendous effort, so in all the steam and everything. So even those ones that were then very heavy, you had to want to wear that hat, because it was a heavy hat. And a heavier hat means more perspiration, because you perspire more, feel warm. The problem is, they cannot understand this. So the best thing to clean a hat, the only thing that generally sort of works when there are true stains, even on a black hat, is to sand it. You sand that, you take away everything you wanted that was the one part of that hat that looked different from most of the hats back then, which meant those long hair. Right, so you could not really sand it. So, in theory, it was meant to last 8 years, the black ones, with the best care, when worn every day, in that context back then, but I think it will last more like 4 years. So, especially if the chap lived in the city, because they were so tremendously dirty. They were not as dirty as, Bantam was super dirty. So that all meant, and also they really back then, they weren't then shiny. So suddenly, because of that silk plush material, it was so much better, it was still cheaper, it was the most expensive, it was very expensive, because they need 40 kilometers of silk strand to make 1 yard, I think, or 5 yards of that material, right? 40, not 40 kilometers, which means I think about 20 miles, 22 miles, imagine that, of that strand, that silk strand. But it was still cheaper, because the wool hat itself, that wool gossamered thingy with shellac, costed nothing to make. It was very cheap to make. It was already coated and dipped into shellac, you know. And they were very fast to assemble. So on a hatter's level, the hat making process is very quick and cheap. Thus, what one paid for, and that's why it was still quite expensive to very expensive. They were kind of the best. It has been exceedingly expensive versus extremely, like the most extremely expensive for the best, you know, peluche, the true peluche ones that were not sheet by having a sheet on top. They were so much cheaper still. So basically, why they paid so much was the hatter was not creating that cloth. He bought it, but he bought it for a loss, and he still wanted to make a profit. So you were basically paying for that silk plush rather than for the hat itself. You were basically not paying anything for the hat itself. For the hatter's work, you were barely paying. Back then, labor was very cheap. And also people, and I will not re-explain that, I'll explain that hat playlist, why people did not need as much, especially the class of people wearing those hats, strong hats anymore, because life was changing, especially by when these truly become the replacement ones, so they reversed. These were the normal ones for, you know, the fairly looking ones. Which were mostly just top hats. They were not really making all the hats like that. They were, but not much. They became the normal ones by about 1825, but the other ones were still popular. It's kind of half-half till about, I would say, 1830, 1835, yeah, depending on where you were. But the other ones remained more or less popular until, I would say, 1850, 55, and sort of still seen occasionally until about 1865. Yeah. And this is linked to the rounders or the derbies, cook hat, you know. So, the idea when they... Well, so, now let us move on. So, one has to get into the writing. To get to those hats, one has to get into writing, understand what the idea with writing was. So, basically, by 1849, most hats were silk plush. Most of the shabby-looking ones, and a lot of the toppers. And back then, remember that in 1849 was the era of toppers. Basically between 1825 until about 1865 was the golden age of top hats, when top hats were not just to have the man hat that they almost wear all the time of the upper middle class and upper classes, but they were kind of worn by everybody, even working class. So obviously, especially the plush ones that the working class were almost every time second hand, and thus they look less good, less new, and they were less trendy because of the time to get it, since they were second hand. But the top hats were everywhere. Yeah. And that was the era of the stovepipe, and all. Stovepipe really means, some people think stovepipe means that it is just a very high, or at least looks very high on the person, so you have to think of a much shorter then. But a stovepipe is actually a shape. So you have some stovepipe hats that are not considered stovepipes, especially in the 1920s and 40s, because they are very straight, but they are shorter, even shorter than that in the 20s and 30s, 40s. But they are actually stovepipe hats because they look like a stovepipe, but they don't actually look like a stovepipe because they are, you know, they're so short, and the brim not being smaller, does not have that tooth patch shape.